Holy City Center Radio, it is episode 166, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, August 30th, 2023. Batten down the hatches, we have a storm coming. Still too early, at least as of this recording, to know for sure what we'll be facing, although we can make some educated guesses. Whatever it is, be sure to stay safe out there. Hurricane Idalia is on the way. Yes, officially became a hurricane this morning. Last I saw, it was only a Category 1. I use the term only, obviously, in reference to other hurricanes. Obviously, still a significant storm. And as of this recording, is making its way into Florida. We'll see what happens and what effects we will have here in Charleston. Still just a little bit too early to know for sure, but we've got some updates. So first, some housekeeping things. One, I am recording this episode Tuesday afternoon, so some information may change. I'm trying not to, get too much in the weeds with storm predictions and announcements because things are going to change all the time. As I'm recording, I'm getting emails. This is now canceled. This is closed. This is postponed. So it's a pointless endeavor to try to include everything right now. And again, things can change so much between now and when the episode actually comes out tomorrow. So just going to keep it as general as possible. I will say that, if you want to get the most up-to-date information, I'm going to do my best to post on holycitycenter.com, as well as especially on Twitter, where, you can give out updates a lot more than some of the other platforms. I will be doing my best to update on any closings, postponements, issues, whatever it may be. So if you want up-to-date information, go there versus obviously this podcast feed. But I always encourage, even though I'm going to do my best, I am a one-man operation. I am not a meteorologist, so I'm just going to be relaying, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I'll just be relaying what the pros are saying. So be sure to follow in whatever capacity local media in town, whether that's television, radio, newspaper. If you're looking at their stuff online, they're going to have the best and most up-to-date information. So be sure to, follow as many local media outlets as you can and see what everybody's saying so you can ensure you've got the best info. Another piece of advice I will give, and I try to do this every time we're going through a storm, as helpful as social media can be with getting important information out and getting it out quickly, how social media is. So one, there could be false information out there. More likely, I don't see, knock on wood, I haven't seen a lot of false information in previous storms going around as it relates to the Charleston area anyway. But always be aware, look at your sources, make sure no one's putting out fake information that could put you in danger or anyone else in danger. But what is more likely to happen with social media, at least in my experience, is because they have all these algorithms and they've all pretty much have gotten away from a traditional timeline when it comes to, hey, if something was posted at 4:00, it's going to post on your timeline at that moment, and it's going to slowly work its way down as other things are posted. No, you know how this works. They want more popular tweets or posts or whatever to get more eyes on them. So you may see a tweet with information that a lot of people interacted with, but it could be hours old. So also check timestamps on any social media post, and really any post, because usually articles as well will have timestamps, when it was published, when it was last updated, if it was at all. But yeah, you'll see this a lot in social media. I've had it before where someone replies to a tweet that is hours and hours old, like, hey, no, they changed this. I'm like, I know, I've already posted the change. You're looking at a message that is several hours old at this point. So just keep that in mind. Some people don't realize that, or when they're in the moment and they see something, they don't realize, oh, I should probably check the timestamp on this. So just be aware of those things. And obviously, if you're watching TV or listening to the radio, if you have power and things, those are going to have, live information for you. But again, there's nothing wrong with social media. It's a great way, especially if we lose any kind of if you lose your television signal, or, if you don't have a radio or whatever, as long as you still can connect to the internet in some capacity, you can usually get information that way. So just keep that in mind when you're out there and doing everything. More housekeeping as far as this podcast. Planning on it coming out on Friday as normal. As I mentioned in the last podcast, I am leaving the state, or at least hoping to still leave the state for a little mini vacation of sorts. between the weather, travel, and everything else, Friday's episode may not happen or may be delayed. Who knows? If we lose power, producers may not be able to edit. I may not be able to record. So who knows what's going to happen? I'm planning on it coming out on Friday, but to be determined. Same with Monday and Wednesday's episode next week. Less so because of weather, but because I'll be traveling. I know when I went to Florida, I fully intended on doing shows all week. It did not. So we'll see. It's a little bit of a different trip this time around. So I'm hoping to still at least get something out with if there's really big news, especially. But there is a chance this is the last episode of the week, or maybe for a little while. Just it's all going to depend on some things, but I'll do my best to keep you all posted on other platforms, specifically social media. I'll likely shoot out a tweet, hey, no show on Friday, blah blah blah. So just a little FYI, but I'm planning on it and hoping to have normal episodes out on the days that we usually do. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes, whether I am indeed coming into your ears on Friday or if a later date. So just I wanted to get that out of the way as well. And I mentioned some personal news. I'll talk about that more in a later episode. This, between traveling and really the storm and having to talk about that, kind of putting that on the back burner, but excited for what's to come in the future. And we'll be definitely sharing all those details. Holy City Center isn't going anywhere. This is part of the new venture that I'm going on. So I'll be sure to keep you posted on that, all that good stuff that's been going on. But for now, it's all about Idalia and the storm, although I've got a couple other stories to get to today. So let's dive into it before it gets too late here. I know you probably are already short on time, so let's move it on. All right, as it relates to the storm, like I said, going to try to keep it broad. There's been a lot of cancellations or schools announcing they're going to get out early or do e-learning, activities being closed. I think the aquarium said they're going to be closed, libraries, we're used to this stuff. For the most up-to-date information, like I said, check social media of local trusted media accounts, or watch local new media on TV, read newspapers here, whatever it may be. Support local media all the time, but this is really where they shine, where they're giving you the information you need. So be sure to follow them for the most up-to-date information. But bigger picture, Governor Henry McMaster has declared a state of emergency in preparation for the potential effects from Hurricane Idalia. I mean, we don't know if it for sure will be a hurricane, if it'll be a tropical storm, how hard will be hit. But this is a typical precautionary measure that the state tends to take a day or two before the storm, hits land. What does this mean? Just means that officials are going to monitor the local forecasts, start taking proper precautions. There's already sandbags being distributed around town. And again, you may see some other preparations being done, maybe businesses boarding up, stuff like that. They're just getting ready and being safe and trying to get stuff done in case we do need to take extra precautions. That also means that the South Carolina Emergency Management Division will coordinate with other state agencies and be prepared to respond to any requests for assistance, whether it's before, during, or after the storm. So the state officially is in a state of emergency and preparing for the storm. Of course, we'll know more as a forecast, as time goes on and we're getting a little bit closer and closer, the more accurate we'll get, as far as forecasts from meteorologists. So that's where we're at right now. In that same vein, I do want to say, as I talked about social media, the Post and Courier, as many people know, have the paper has a digital paywall, meaning if you don't have a subscription, you I think it's 5 articles, maybe it's up to 10. I forgot what the number is, but there's a handful of articles you can look at every month for free. But once you hit that limit, you are no longer able to read those articles, and you have to get a subscription. I'm not going to get on my soapbox right now and say you should have a subscription to your local paper. Yes, you do have to pay for local media sometimes. No, advertising, especially in newspapers, is not going to be enough of a budget like it was when you were probably younger and everybody had a newspaper delivered 7 days a week or whatever it was. Support them, if you can. But good news, there will be no paywall during the storm. So that means you'll be able to visit their website, whether it's stories related to the storm or not. You'll be able to get important information. So this makes sense. Glad they're doing it. It's good for the community. There should be no reason during an emergency or potential emergency situation that people can't get accurate and up-to-date news. So I appreciate them doing that. And so just keep that in mind. If you're one of those people who kind of avoids the Post and Courier, or at least avoids like clicking on links, you're like, oh, I want to save my free stories or whatever. They have implemented the removal of that paywall during the storm. So go read your stories, especially the ones as it relates to Idalia. All right, so that's where we're at with the storm. Again, it doesn't make much sense to dive in much deeper than that at this point. There's just too many unknowns, and just in the manner of this podcast recording, the afternoon before it comes out, I don't want to be putting out a ton of information that's super old by the time you hear it. So again, go social media and local, make sure they're reliable sources, and see what important information is out there. So let's go on to the other stories. This one I think is really interesting. You may have seen a story earlier this week in the Post and Courier. It was written by David Slade. He was reporting that there is an 84-year-old man by the name of Lee Abernethy, and he lives in Berkeley County here in South Carolina. And he recently saw his residential property tax bill jump from $1,500 a year up to $5,500 a year. So a $4,000 difference in his property tax bill. Why? Because he married a woman who isn't a U.S. citizen. That's right. His property tax jumped $4,000 because he married someone who is not a citizen. Why is that? Well, the Berkeley County assessor says that he is no longer qualified for the state's 33% tax break for an owner-occupied property. Now, without that homeowner designation, not only does he not get that break, but he also no longer qualifies for an even larger homeowner exception from school operating taxes or another special tax break for homeowners age 65 and older. So this poor gentleman, 84 years old, he's got a handful of tax breaks for different reasons, and he no longer qualifies for any of them simply because he married someone who is not a U.S. citizen. Seems ridiculous to me, and probably does to you as well. And you're also probably wondering, why haven't I heard of this before? I feel like this is something that would have been in the news before. Well, apparently, one of the reasons is that assessors in different counties don't always interpret the law the exact same way. So there's variations on this. So, for instance, if Mr. Abernethy had lived in a different part of South Carolina, this law may not have applied, which doesn't make sense. It's supposed to be a statewide law. So it's really bizarre. And as the Post and Courier pointed out in an editorial article that they followed up with after the initial story, this is a sign of either bad assessors who don't know their laws, or more likely they think it's a poorly written law and it can be, interpreted in different ways. So what's at issue here is a law that was passed in 2012 that requires property owners, in order to qualify for these tax breaks, to certify that they and nor any other member of their household claim to be a legal resident of a jurisdiction other than South Carolina for any purpose. So it doesn't even have to be the fact that he married someone who is not a U.S. citizen. He could have married someone from a different state who is an American citizen, but just doesn't live here for whatever reason. Because as you hear in that law, no one in the household is supposed to live outside of South Carolina for any purpose, which is ridiculous to not get this tax break. That means, the way it's written, a family could have a child go off to college, move out of state, and the parents on the home they own no longer get to get a tax break. It doesn't make any sense. So the language is part of a section designed to ensure that people who get these, great homeowner tax statuses actually deserve it. Because that house they say they're living in really should be their primary residence. I mean, hey, that all makes sense, of course. And before 2012, that whole quote, any other purpose, end quote, that is in the law, it didn't apply to other household members. It was just, whoever the homeowner was. Although the law did require the homeowner to certify that other members of the household weren't living in another residence that was receiving an owner occupied tax break. So previous to 2012, it didn't really matter what everybody in your household did, unless they lived somewhere else and they were also receiving a similar kind of tax break. That makes sense, of course. I get I don't wish it was that way, but I get where the law is going, in that direction. But yeah, really bizarre situation. You feel for the guy, feel for anyone who would see their taxes jump up that much, but especially, an elderly person in their 80s. Sad situation for him to lose all those different tax breaks just because of what seems to be the way one assessor is interpreting the law. Something to keep an eye on for sure. Hopefully, legislators will fix it, or at least if this is the way it's going to be, make it clear so people know what they could potentially be running into in a situation like this. But yeah, certainly a bummer of a situation for that man, and hopefully it'll get resolved for him, or he is able to pay these taxes without any sort of issue. But something to keep in mind, we have a kind of a wonky law where it seems people are taking it in different manners. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, just be wary and try to get the best information you can from somebody who works in that county. All right. Charleston County, in another story, has agreed to a $1.1 million settlement with the family of James Britt, who died in October 2019 after he was restrained by Mount Pleasant police and injected with ketamine by county paramedics. In her lawsuit, widow Tabitha Britt alleged excessive force, due process violations, negligence, and wrongful death on the part of the paramedics and the county that employs and trains them. So what happened here was back on September 30th, 2019, a Mount Pleasant police officer stopped near the Snee Farm subdivision to offer to help Britt change a flat tire. He drove by, saw the man had a flat tire, offered to help. A police report later stated that officers were initially dispatched for a man urinating on the roadway. That's why they were originally in the area. When they arrived, he wasn't urinating, he had a flat tire. However, when they started to help him, the first officer to arrive noted in her report that Britt smelled of, quote, intoxicants, end quote. A weird way to word that usually it's like smelled of alcohol. So it's just interesting that it listed intoxicants. May not mean anything, but just to me, that seems weird. Anytime I've seen police reports like this, it usually references specifically what they smell. Like officers smelled marijuana smoke, or the smell of marijuana coming from the car, or officers noticed slurred speech and the smell of alcohol in a breath. It just was worded oddly. But in any event, after more officers arrived, Britt, who was 50 years old, was told he was being placed under arrest for public intoxication. He argued with the officers, asked to speak with a supervisor, and eventually started struggling with the officers. In fact, he even tried biting one of them. So, no surprise, this leads to the police using some bit of force, and maybe some of it was justified, maybe some of it wasn't. But they did force him onto the ground on his stomach and then placed him in handcuffs and leg restraints. Britt told officers he could not breathe more than a dozen times, according to the lawsuit, and his exhales sounded like, quote, a loud snore, end quote. That is usually indicative of some sort of respiratory distress. Despite this, several officers continued to hold him face down on the ground until paramedics arrived. We've obviously have heard this before. George Floyd comes to mind, most notoriously, of course, the officers kneeling, or one officer in particular, Derek Chauvin, kneeling on him and ultimately being found guilty of killing George Floyd because of that. And we've seen other situations where officers, when trying to keep restraining someone, they mention they can't breathe, whether some of those are serious or not. I'm sure that can be debated. I've seen some like cop shows and stuff where people say that and they don't really mean it, but it seems obviously he said it multiple times. He's making noises, not a good situation. So paramedics eventually arrive and then injected him with 500 milligrams of ketamine, which is the maximum dose allowed under county guidelines. Why ketamine? Well, it is, believe it or not, allowed in this country. I don't know about every police force, but specifically, police in Charleston County are allowed to use ketamine. It's an anesthetic that is commonly used in both human and veterinary medicine, believe it or not. And of course, you may know it as an illicit drug. I'm sure you've heard stories or maybe mentioned in television or movies or what have you. But it is something that is supposed to, it's basically a sedative. It's going to try to calm someone down, and they are allowed to use it in particular situations. Unfortunately, in this one, uh, in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, Britt's heart actually stopped beating. Paramedics were able to get it beating again, but he never regained consciousness, and he ultimately died on October 16th, 2019 at the Medical University of South Carolina. So yes, his death did come 2.5 weeks after the arrest, but it was ultimately ruled a homicide, according to SLED. Specifically, an autopsy report listed his main causes of death as, quote, restraint, asphyxia, and toxic effects of ketamine, end quote. So, in filing this suit, Tabitha Britt and her attorneys sought to have an injunction that would bar Charleston County EMS from using ketamine solely for law enforcement purposes rather than, say medical reasons. But because this case was actually settled, the injunction was never ruled on. So, at this moment, there appears to be no change in policy when it comes to administering ketamine in these types of situations. A spokesperson said that no one else has died as a result of the injections, though it's unclear if Charleston County EMS actually even tracks those figures. So there's some debate on that, according to this article that appeared in the Post and Courier. For their part, the county disputed any liability for Britt's death, but ultimately did agree on this settlement. It was ultimately approved by U.S. District Court Judge Richard Gergel on August 28th. But the details outside of the $1 million I mentioned at the top, there's not really much else that's been out there. This isn't the only settlement. The town of Mount Pleasant also settled a wrongful death claim related to Britt's death. That one was for $3 million. So, despite these two settlements, the South Carolina Attorney General's office has cleared Mount Pleasant police and county paramedics of criminal wrongdoing in Britt's death. So, despite the autopsy saying it was the ketamine and the restraint combined that led to his death, or at least were the main causes of his death, and the fact that there's two settlements, Attorney General's not moving forward with any charges. Not so sure how I feel about that. Seems pretty clear. The combination, it wasn't just one person, but the combination of that restraint and the ketamine is ultimately what the coroner ruled was the cause of death. And it seems someone should be held accountable. Now, granted, these settlements are in some manner holding people accountable in some way, but it does seem like there should be arrests in this case. But at this time, that it appears this is now a resolved issue. We'll see if there are any changes with how the county decides if ketamine can still be used in situations where they feel like it's needed to help restrain and sedate someone who's being combative. So we'll see if that's even allowed, period, anymore, or if they'll make some adjustments to it. But at this time, business as usual. There's been no changes that have resulted from this tragic death. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Holy City Center Radio. As I mentioned, hopefully I'll talk to you on Friday. Stay safe out there. I know we get a little complacent with storms, and even I'm looking at this and hey, you know what? This isn't going to be so bad. Category 1 tops, probably tropical storm, probably out to sea. We're going to have some rain, some wind, some flooding. It'll, it's going to put a damper on some things, no pun intended. Maybe some things are going to be closed, or you're going to have to hang out at home. Even I'm finding myself being like, what's the big deal? And it might not be, but I think it's okay to be relaxed and not overhype things, but also take these things seriously and make sure that you're doing at least something, so that if this thing goes wrong or something happens that you didn't foresee, that you have what's necessary to protect yourself, your family, your home, your pets, whatever it may be. So just be safe, be smart, and keep an eye on the weather and local news. And hopefully we'll get through this thing. No big deal. That's the hope. We'll just, deal with some flooding, maybe some damage of things falling, branches and stuff falling if there's high winds, but hopefully it won't be too bad. But again, take all these things seriously. Stay safe out there. Pay attention to local media and check those, like I said, check those timestamps to make sure you've got the most up-to-date information if you are getting your news from, sites like Twitter and whatnot. Regardless, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Cole Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this episode. And thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode. Again, stay safe out there. I'll talk to you soon enough. If the episodes are canceled, I'll be on social media posting updates and on the website as normal. If you'd like to support the website, in addition to all the, rating, reviewing, subscribing to this podcast that I always mention, you can also go to patreon.com/holycitycenter, sign up for one of those support tiers. You can also go to holycitycenter.com/shop, where you can pick up some merchandise. Might as well get something a little extra, get something for yourself when you're supporting the site, right? Get a cool hat, t-shirt, whatever it may be. So I appreciate it. Stay safe out there. Until the next episode, good night and good luck.